Now we're going to extend our UI and make it work for 2 players. Of course, you can go on to 4 players or however many we want, but I think that 2 is a good point to get to. So we've got our canvas here. Let's add in a new script. We're going to add in a PlayerCanvas script that will allow us to bind multiple players to our player panels. So we're going to go to the scripts folder. I'll right click and just choose create and choose C# script. Put in the word PlayerCanvas, capital P, capital C, and no spaces again. We'll open that script up. And that didn't open. There it goes. Now it's open. And inside of our PlayerCanvas, I want to have a way to have multiple player panels so that we can assign all of the player panels that are children to it, and then have our players just try to bind to the player canvas and it'll know which player panel to give them. So to do that, we're going to first delete our start and updates, something I almost always will end up doing. We're going to add a serialized field. And the serialized field is going to be of type player panel, but it's going to be an array of them. So to make it an array, we're going to use the square braces. That means that we can have multiple, any number of them really, and then we can go through or iterate through them or find them by index. And we're going to call this underscore player panels. Now we're going to create a bind method. So let's go look at our player panel. Inside of our player, there it is, our player panel, we have a bind method that takes a player. We're going to take this definition right here, public void bind, and copy it. I'm going to go right into PlayerCanvas and paste. We're going to have a public void bind that binds to a player right inside of here. And what we want to do now is find the correct player panel and bind to that panel. And we've got a couple of ways that we could do it. We could maybe keep track of the last player panel that was bound up and then maybe store that in some variable or something. We could maybe put them into some list or some collection of them. There's lots of different weird ways that we could do it, but we're going to go with what I think is the smartest and simplest way. We're going to get the player index from the player's input the player input script on the player, and then we'll just get the player panel that matches at that index. Check this out. So first thing we want to do is get the player input. So we'll say var player input equals player dot get component, and we'll get the player input. Then we'll get the index from the player input. Say player input dot player index. So we've got this value, and this is going to be either 0 for the first player, 1 for the second player, 2 for the third player, 3 for the fourth player. Essentially, it's going to be a number starting with 0 for the first player and counting up. So we want to get the player panel at that index and then bind our player to it. So we have this index, and to get the player panel at that index, we just take player panels, we'll put it right here at the front, underscore player panels, and add a square brace around this player input dot player index. So we'll either get number 0 or number 1 or whatever number. And then we will bind to that number. So we'll call the bind method and pass in our player. We'll save this off. Let's go into Unity and see what these indexes look like on the player panels and go assign them real quick. Might make a little bit more sense if you're a little bit confused. So we'll jump back into Unity. Go to this canvas. Let's rename it to be PlayerCanvas so that it matches the name of our script. We'll assign the PlayerCanvas script to it. I'm going to collapse these other components here. And then we've got our player panels. On our player panels, we'll just drag the first player panel on, drop it on, and you can see this is element 0. So this is at index 0. Now we don't have a second player panel, so we're going to need to create one. To do that, we'll select our player panel, hit Control or Command D to duplicate it, and then expand out that rect transform that I just collapsed. There we go. We want to anchor and dock this to the top right. So I'll click on the anchor control, Alt and Shift, and hit the top right. And there we go. I've got one up at the top right. This will be player panel 2. I'm just going to rename it. And then let's rename the first one to be player panel 1, just so that we have nice clean names and we can see them when we're in our canvas. Let's go back to the canvas. We'll drag player panel 2 on. You can see that that has an element of 1. So player index 1 is going to get assigned to that. Let's save. Press play, and now when we go into Unity, we should see, let's see, well, first we're going to see some errors in the console, but let's run over here, grab a couple coins, and you can see that I've got some points on one of my players. Let's go grab some coins on the other one. And you can see that, well, that's interesting. Oh, I've got coins on the other player. Now, the reason for this is that inside of my player script, oh, let's go take a look. Inside of my player script, when we call the bind method, we didn't actually call into the new player canvas's bind. We're still just binding the player panel. So we'll change player panel to be player canvas and save, and that should fix our binding issue so that both players get their own canvas. Let's check that out, and then we'll check out the error message that's in the console. So we'll press play. Now I expect the first player to be bound to the left one, and the second player to be bound to the right one. So come over here, get a couple coins, looks good, and I come over on player 2, grab some coins, and it's looking pretty good. Things are looking solid. So this is good, but we do have an error here. The error has gone away, though. You can see that it was logging out an error. If I uncheck this collapse, there's a whole bunch of them. I have 347 of that error specifically. If you don't see them, just make sure that the error is not disabled. You can disable and enable them right here. I've re-enabled it, and you can see them right here. So why did it stop, and what was causing it? Let's stop playing and play one more time. And look at the errors. They just keep going and going and going and going. Watch what happens when I join with player 2. The errors go away. Now let's take a look at what this error message is saying. I'm going to hit collapse, and you see that they're all the same error message, meaning that it's the same thing happening every single frame, happened 994 times. Let's go double click on it. We can see it's in player panel. .cs on line 19, an object is not set to an instance of an object. So we're trying to use something that doesn't exist. So we'll double click on it. And if you look here on line 19, the thing that doesn't exist is probably the player, because we haven't assigned or bound a player to this object yet, but we're still trying to update it. So imagine we've got our second player panel there. Our first one's got player 1 already kind of assigned automatically and instantly, but player 2 isn't assigned until they come in. But every frame until they come in, we're trying to use that player and read a coin value, but there's no player assigned. So we need to add in a check here on line 19. We'll copy the word player, _player, add in a new line. We'll say if player, and then add the closing brace, and then add in a tab here just to clean up our formatting. So now it's only going to do this code if we actually have a player bound. If we haven't bound a player yet, we won't see that code running. We won't get the error. Let's try it out. We'll press play. And look at that, no more error. All right, let's stop playing and go into Plastic SCM. Actually, before we do that, let's turn this into a prefab. Let's take our player canvas, go into our prefabs folder, drag it in. So we now have a player canvas prefab, and then let's load up level 2. So I'm going to hit load scene. We'll drag our player canvas into there as well. So we have a player canvas in both of our levels. So that way our game is going to work across levels. We don't have to worry about it yet. We're going to talk more about how to deal with this across a whole bunch of levels later. But for now, we're just going to make sure that it's in both of them. Save so that both of our levels are saved. Remember, if you don't know how to get both of these levels out here, let me just show you one more time. So if you double clicked on a level and it just opened one, you can just click and drag and add another level there. You just don't want to have them both loaded when you play. Just make sure that you hit unload to unload the scene that you don't want to play, or you can always right click and hit remove to unload it completely and just get it out of there. Let's go into plastic now and say that we've added multiple player canvases, or we added the player canvas. Added player canvas and support for UI on multiple players. And we'll check that in.